So this is the second in our series of 3 collaborative webinars, and today we're going to be discussing all different types of co-ops with a focus on worker-owned co-ops. There will be several breakout groups and chances for you all to contribute, and I am really looking forward to working collaboratively with you all. So I'd like to start this webinar by going through some community agreements, and these are intended to make this as effective and as inclusive as possible to respect everyone's time and presence here. So the first community agreement is one mic. That just means one person is speaking, everyone else is listening. And in this virtual setting, that just means please mute yourself when you're not speaking. The next one is all are welcome and make yourself comfortable. Now, again, in the virtual setting, what does comfortable look like? To me, it means, your video's on if you'd like it to be. We all love seeing everyone's faces, especially when, we're in this antisocial time. However, if you're more comfortable turning your video off, please do, your choice. Please take care of your needs, eat, drink water, get up and stretch. Please use the chat box, make use of that for any questions and also to communicate with each other. We'll answer them as best as we can throughout the webinar. During discussion sections, there's a raise your hand function in the participants window of Zoom, so please use that, or also you can type your question or response into the chat. Next community agreement is assume best intentions and beware of impacts. That means that if someone says something that you might not like, feel free to challenge them, push back on it, but try to assume that we are all in this space together because we're interested in learning and collaborating and making Buffalo work better for everyone. And be aware of impacts. That just means try to think about what privileges and perspectives you're bringing to this space and how you may inadvertently cause harm to someone else. So it's looking out for yourself and looking out for others. Next thing is we do intend to record this just for our own purposes so we can send this out to folks who can't be here tonight and put up on a YouTube channel. If anyone is not okay with that, we will not do that. So please feel free to reach out to us either in the chat or personally email us, whichever you would like. Next thing is, I already posted in the chat, but please introduce yourselves. One of the goals of this is to get folks talking to each other and collaborating on projects. So please use the chat as much as you'd like to. Finally, we would like to share emails for the participants for future collaboration. Again, we're just trying to build and grow this community as we go. So please, if you have any issue with that, also reach out. So this webinar is informed by the principles of popular education, or POP-Ed for short. We believe that we all have a lot to learn from each other, and that collective liberation requires collective learning. And it's based on the premise that no one knows everything, but together we know a lot. All right, to start, true to our POP-Ed values, we're going to start with hearing from you all. In order to participate, please type in the chat, raise your hand, or just share something right out. Like you can speak just out, and we call this popcorn style. And so we'd like to start with the question, what do you think of when you hear the word cooperative? Anyone have any thoughts about, what the word cooperative brings up for them?
That ownership and power for decision making is shared.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you.
I mean, honestly, I think of the Lexington Co-op immediately, but that's just me, I guess.
Totally, and it's funny. I talk to Andrew about this all the time. We love the Lexington Co-op, and co-ops are much more than just that. So we're hoping to expand on that. I see working together despite differences. I love that. Anyone else? I see working to become active in a regenerative world.
Just leveling of the playing field so that everybody's kind of on par and nobody's, the hierarchy is, everybody's looked at as an equal.
Yeah. I love that. Cool. Well, those are all really great, and I totally agree with all of them. What we have as a working definition is a co-op is an entity designed to meet the common economic, social, and cultural needs and aspirations of its members. And co-ops are categorized, all co-ops are categorized as being member-owned, member-controlled, and member-benefiting. So member-owned, what does that mean? Simply, it just means a cooperative is jointly owned and governed by its members, like you all were already talking about. Contrast this with traditional for-profit businesses, which are owned and governed by one or a few individuals or shareholders whose main interest is generating profits. Member-controlled. This means that cooperatives are run by the democratic principle of one member, one vote. Again, in traditional enterprises, control is based on individual ownership and in value shares. So it's more like $1 equals one vote, which we're trying to move away from. And finally, member benefiting. Cooperatives are operated for the benefit of their members. This means that it is economically benefiting. Net income is often redistributed back to the members. And these returns are based on value contributed or usage. And this is going to look different depending on the type of co-op, and we will come back to that later. So let's back up for a second. Cooperatives have, like we were talking about, they're non-hierarchical, they're not based on money, but we currently operate under capitalism. But we've seen that cooperatives operate differently than capitalist enterprises, and this reflects a difference in values. So I want to open up the floor again to you all. What are some of capitalism's values, and what are some cooperative values? Let's start with capitalism. What do you all think of when you think of capitalist values?
Profit making.
Say again.
Profit making.
Yep, definitely. Profit making as the main goal. I see money first. Yeah.
Profit over people.
Profit over people, definitely. Sustaining inequality, for sure. Yeah, I'm sorry. The stock, yeah, it's supposed to be the stock market. It's a dumb meme about the stock market. Wealth hoarding, yep. Exploitation, extractive, yep. Okay, so we're all on the same page. We see that capitalism is maybe not the ideal set of values that we're looking for. So what are some cooperative values?
Meeting needs.
I love that.
Equitable wealth distribution.
Yep. Interdependence, yep. Cool. So you all get it. Let's dive a little deeper into this contrast. So here are some of the principles under which capitalist businesses operate, given the values of capitalism that we just discussed. So Milton Friedman is a famous economist in the 20th century. For better or worse, he had a lot of influence over the field and kind of pushed us in the direction of where we are now in terms of like a neoliberal style economy. And he says there's only one responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase profits so long as it stays within the rules of the game. And then the shareholder primacy norm says a business cooperation is organized and carried on primarily for the profit of stockholders. The power of the directors are to be employed for that end. So it's not even like capitalists or capitalism tries to hide that the value is just profit. And so what cooperatives do is they challenge that. So cooperatives have a set of principles as well, which they voluntarily adhere to. And these were introduced back in 1844 by the Rochdale pioneers. And we're going to talk a little more about the history of co-ops in a second. but this list has been updated by the International Cooperative Alliance since then. So the first one is voluntary and open membership. So that just means that co-ops are voluntary organizations open to all who use its services and willing to accept the responsibilities of membership. Next one is democratic member control. They are democratic organizations controlled by members who actively participate in setting policies and making decisions. Economic participation. Members contribute equitably to and democratically control the capital of their co-op, so the finances or the economic aspects of it. Co-ops are autonomous, self-organized, and controlled by their members. Co-ops are dedicated to education, training, and information. You cannot successfully and democratically run a business if education and training isn't shared, if information isn't widely available. Cooperation among co-ops. This is one of my favorite ones. Principle 6 is that co-ops serve their members and most effectively and strengthen the cooperative movement by working together. So it's not this cutthroat competition. It's recognizing that even separate co-ops are part of this one movement to increase cooperativism. Concern for community is the last one. They work for the sustainable development of communities through policies which are democratically decided by their members. So that was a lot of information. Feel free to post questions in the chat. But for now, I'm going to pass it to Liana, who's going to talk about the history of co-ops.
Thanks, Michael. So cooperatives have been around for a very long time throughout the US, and they've often emerged during some of the nation's most pivotal points in history. The earliest American populist movement, so particularly the labor movement with the Knights of Labor during the late 1800s and the agrarian movements, they featured co-ops as a strategy to build worker power. However, it's super important to note that the populist movement was highly white dominated and racially segregated with specific respect to Black people in the US. So after the Civil War, opportunities for jobs and land ownership were severely limited among Black folks, and co-ops became a useful tool for them to build and maintain wealth among their families and communities. So there were a lot of co-ops popping up in like the rural South and in areas where there were Black farmers who were looking for ways to build upon their communities. And later in the 1900s, Black and working class people used mutual aid networks and cooperatives as a means to cope with the effects of the Great Depression. So this could look like getting together to try to help each other out when there wasn't enough food available, and trying to create grocery stores where there was a food desert or something like that. And it's also really important to note that this wasn't just a strategy that people used in rural agricultural areas. It was also very common in industrial and urban centers. And the civil rights era, along with the rest of the 20th century, saw numerous cooperatives form, particularly among Black women who led certain co-op development groups. And as for a local history, Buffalo has a very rich history in cooperative movements, especially within the Black community. So in 1928, Dr. Ezekiel Nelson, who was a local Black physician, he founded the Citizens Cooperative Society, and he formed the society with the intent of promoting economic opportunities among the city's Black community through collective work and responsibility. Although the society was short-lived, he also founded the Buffalo Consumers Economic Society in 1933, which focused on educating the public on how co-ops worked and what cooperative economics was. In 1944, the society changed its name and opened up a cooperative grocery store and a credit union, which stayed open for 17 years. And this is actually very important because this made it one of the longest Black co-op endeavors in US history. And one more recently Black-led co-op in Buffalo was Our Market, which, like its predecessors, was founded as a means to grant voice and economic opportunity to its community, and also make groceries more easily accessible and available in low-income neighborhoods. And of course, co-ops are also happening all over the world. They have a very strong international presence, and one of the most well-known examples is the Mondragon Co-op in Spain, which emerged as a response to a regional economic crisis. Another more recent example is the Reclaimed Factories movement in Argentina, in which recently laid off workers would take over their workplaces and run them themselves. And actually, the picture in this PowerPoint shows a ceramic tile factory in Argentina. The name of the factory is Fa Sin Pat, which is short for a phrase in Spanish that literally translates to a factory with no bosses, which is pretty cool to see. And both of these co-ops, so in Spain and Argentina, they still exist today, which shows their ability to weather hardship over time. Likewise, there are co-ops in Italy, which exist in the social service sector, that fared very well during the 2008 recession and other recent events, indicating some merit in the idea that co-ops are well equipped to provide people in light of major crises and other similar situations.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liana. I'm now going to pass the mic to Andrew, who's going to talk about different types of co-ops.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Leanna. Yeah, so when we talk about co-ops as a sector of the economy, there's actually a number of different ways that they can be organized. And there are even newer ways that folks continue to sort of iterate and experiment with that are more complex than some of the original formations. I'm gonna go through each of the items in this list here. So the one that we will be focusing on the most today, and the one that Cooperation Buffalo focuses on most in our work, is the worker co-op, where workers, a particular stakeholder group, are the co-owners of the business. Instead of like a single owner who maybe just has financial ownership in the company, this is anybody who's an employee. Using that cooperative principle of voluntary and open membership, any employee can become a worker owner. On the basis of one worker, one vote. They get to decide and control what goes on at the business, how profits are shared, that sort of thing. Consumer co-ops are another very popular one. Somebody called out the Lexington cooperative market at the beginning. Consumer co-ops are where a group of folks that, as a stakeholder group, consider themselves consumers of a particular product or service, want to form a business to meet the need of having certain products or services available to them. Consumer co-ops can be grocery stores, they could be childcare collectives of families. There's also examples where consumer co-ops are like in particular retail sectors too. Community gardens kind of falls under that consumer co-op model because it's a bunch of folks that share garden space together in a way that lets them really share the benefits of whatever they're producing. Producer co-ops is the most common example of that is agricultural co-ops, especially here in the US, where a number of small farms might get together to share either marketing, advertising, sort of overhead resources internally to leverage a brand together, or they'll actually like share equipment and things that they need because it can be very expensive for each individual farm to own that equipment themselves. Producer co-ops also can take the form of small independent contractors that get together, like artists or freelancers to again, share a brand or to share equipment or resources. Housing co-ops are another great example where folks will get together and co-own housing, buildings, property together with the express purpose of providing that generally affordable housing to their members long-term. Community land trusts are kind of another form of housing co-ops with a little bit more complexity. Community land trusts are traditionally nonprofit entities that own land and then rent the land in a permanently affordable way to homeowners to preserve a neighborhood against gentrification. And then the last one mentioned here, I kind of alluded to this like experimentation aspect. Sometimes we'll see co-ops that actually combine different stakeholder groups. So you might have a consumer co-op grocery store that also has worker owners, and the consumer owners and the worker owners might each elect a certain number of representatives to the board that guides the co-op's decisions. We'll talk a little bit about that governance model later. So they both share in the decision making, and they both can share in the wealth that's created from the co-op as well. And now I'll call out a couple local co-op examples. First, in that category of worker co-ops, worker ownership. The Bread Hive Bakery and Cafe over on Buffalo's west side, which is both the wholesale bakery and they now have a cafe operation, is worker owned. Also, the Rose Garden Early Childhood Center, again, on the west side at Lafayette Grant Streets, has recently converted to worker ownership after initially being started as just a single owner business. The owner retired and wanted to make sure that the business stayed on for the community's benefit, but also for the teachers' benefit who work there. And so the teachers became the owners of the business. And then there's Grow Op or Grow Operative, which is a vertical farm, an indoor vertical farm in Buffalo that produces microgreens and herbs. And it was started as a worker-owned operation. Some examples of consumer co-ops. We mentioned the Lexington Co-op, which is one of a number of white-led co-ops that came about in the 70s and 80s here in Buffalo. But we also have the African Heritage Food Co-op, which is explicitly trying to serve food deserts and folks of color who do not have access to fresh fruits and vegetables. African Heritage has a location in Niagara Falls and also near Clinton and Bailey on the far east side. Then there's the Urban Roots Community Garden Center on Rhode Island Street, again on the west side in Buffalo, which is an example of a consumer-owned garden center. And at the time of their founding, and I think it's true now, they're still the only consumer-owned garden center in the country. And then on the housing front, Buffalo for the past 19 years has had the Nickel City Housing Cooperative that owns 2 buildings and has about 25 total members. Where the 2 buildings are co-managed and co-owned collectively. And these are just some examples. There are other co-ops that are either emerging or already in existence here in Buffalo. And there's certainly lots of other co-ops that have existed over the past 100+ years in Buffalo. Leanna called out a few of them in the Black community specifically earlier. I'll turn it back over to Michael.
Cool, thank you so much, Andrew. So you have listened to us talk a lot. And now that we've learned about what co-ops are, how they operate within capitalism, how they are different than capitalist businesses, and talked about a few of the co-ops that currently exist, I would love to start a conversation about growing the community. And so I'd like us to break out into small groups and take around 7 minutes. I think we could go a few more minutes than that if we need to, and discuss the following. First, I would love it if you all just, in the breakout groups, introduce yourselves to each other for a moment. Which is your name, your pronouns, and what brings you here. I'm sure that there's something that you brought with you here that you have to contribute. And then the questions are, what types of co-ops do you want to see in Buffalo? Where is there a need for co-ops? Remembering that co-ops currently exist in every sector of the economy. And also, if you could personally start a co-op, what would it be? And maybe some basic features about what it would look like. And then we'll do a share out. We'll bring it back to the whole group and see what some of y'all came up with. So Andrew, if you could please break us out, we will go do that now. I hope that was a good and fun experience for you all. What can anyone speak to what they came up with? Either what types of co-ops I want to see or any great ideas for your own co-op?
I can share from my group. We talked about that we'd like to see more theaters, schools, social services type co-ops, hospitals, and there were some really cool ideas as far as starting a co-op. We had one person that mentioned like a tech library where you could borrow tech hardware items. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but it sounded really cool. And event and music venues. Yeah, I think that covered it. But anyone else from my group, feel free to speak up if I missed something.
Yeah, does anyone want to elaborate on any of that very awesome sounding stuff that Carrie brought up?
Carrie, did you say hospitals?
I did.
Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I am in healthcare, and I just think hospitals would be much better run if they were ran by the people who did the work and not a CEO. Because, like, weirdly enough, the CEOs of most hospitals are not healthcare workers. So like, how are they supposed to make decisions that benefit patients the most? They don't. They make decisions based on profit instead of saving lives, which is a little bit messed up because it's a hospital.
Absolutely. And even if we had something like Medicare for all, we would still have the issue of private insurers. So if we could make hospitals co-ops, that would be amazing. I totally
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah. Who else?
So Emmy in my group already has this really cool business of her own called Gardeness. That's like landscaping and like correcting soil imbalances and issues with gardens and such using actual plants. And she wants to turn that into a co-op kind of, which is the coolest idea I've heard of like all month. And also it's going to be better, so I'm excited. We talked about that. A potential small like movie theater slash Shakespeare theater because there were local performances as a co-op. I was weird. I was ideating like a cooperative martial arts academy because every different
Yes.
differently. Like I work at a couple different ones and they all kind of operate the same way, and I kind of wonder how it could be better if everyone was co-owner in terms of training and teaching and equipment and finances and everything.
Definitely. Those all sound incredible. Who else? Let's do a couple more. Those are all also good.
Well, we kind of thought it should, some of them would be around basic human needs. So, I mean, social services makes a lot of sense. Obviously, housing, housing would probably be a good one. I don't know. I mean, food, obviously. I mean, what does it take for a human to live? Whatever. So start with the basics and then kind of go out from there, or the essentials, I should say.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Did anyone have any ideas that they could actually see themselves doing as like starting a co-op or being a part of a co-op?
Our group talked about healthcare as well, and one of the members of our group is a mental health worker, and I'm a yoga teacher, and part of what brought me here was very much recently thinking, I don't like any of the models. I don't like any of them. They're, yoga and wellness things tend to be very privileged experiences, and it really bothers me. I don't want to work in a spa. I don't like the studio owner model that, is independent contractors. So I can see a lot of these things: martial arts, yoga, and mental health, physical wellness, all kind of coming together. I would love to be able to take any money that's available for private insurance companies, including out of my own household, and figure out how to put it into a cooperative model immediately. That just seems like something we don't have locally, and we need right now more than almost anything else. We have some other things. We're in this intense crisis moment communally in a way I don't remember personally. We need mental health. We need, how many people have lost what insurance they do have right now? I just, not to take up too much time, my most passionate thing this evening is hearing how many people have thought of wellness activities and healthcare. It just, I would love to see that come out of this meeting somehow.
Awesome. Yeah, that's so great. I'm like so excited about these responses, and I think one amazing thing about the co-op model is that you can actually run a business in a way that actually benefits people and actually runs democratically and actually meets human needs. I want to keep rolling just because we have a lot of other stuff to cover, but I literally could just listen to all of your ideas all day because I'm like, yes, let's do it. But let's keep going for now. Oops. So Cooperation Buffalo focuses mainly on worker co-ops. So we love all types of co-ops. Consumer co-ops are great, but our main focus is worker co-ops. Why? I'll tell you. First of all, we care about worker empowerment. We care about specifically, you know, we live in a society that calls itself democratic. However, when you go to work, you are living in a kind of de facto hierarchical, like in some cases sort of tyrannical, but definitely not democratic workplace. And most of us are working 40 hours a week or more. So there's kind of a tension between living in a democracy but working in an authoritarian situation. So we care a lot about kind of introducing democracy directly to the workplace. And we mean direct democratic control and self-direction, not just ownership or financial return. So like, for example, you know, a consumer co-op, let's take, for example, the Lexington Co-op, which again, I'm a member of and I love. The workers there don't have immediate control over their workplace. They are beholden to a hierarchical system, just like any other job. So even though the workers there are also technically owners, they don't have direct democratic control, and just as importantly, self-direction. They are directed by somebody else. And finally, unlike other types of co-ops, worker co-ops directly create wealth for marginalized communities, and especially for traditionally low-wage work. So wages at worker co-ops are across the board higher than at traditional businesses in the same industry, and it's a form of direct wealth creation for folks who are working in marginalized communities. So again, we love all co-ops. We focus on worker co-ops for those reasons. So now I want to kind of get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. Like I said, I could talk forever about the ideas, but worker co-ops currently exist in a capitalist economy. We've seen how cooperative principles and cooperative values differ from capitalist values and principles, but co-ops exist within capitalism for now. This means that co-ops need to exist within the capitalist framework, legal code, and even ideology, like competition. Bread Hive is a bakery that has to compete with other bakeries that aren't co-ops right now. It's just part of existing in capitalism. But the democratic nature of worker co-ops allows them to take on many forms of governance and management that puts community and people over profit. So this is a map. This is a few years old, so the landscape even looks better today than it used to. But this is a map of worker co-ops in the United States. The median pay scale is 2 to 1. So by pay scale, I mean from the person who earns the least to earns the most at co-ops is 2 to 1. And that's compared to 303 to 1 for large US corporations. So like, think about that for a second. At a co-op business, even one that's pretty large, like at scale, maybe it has like 30 worker owners or something like that, and there are a few of those in the United States. The person who makes the most only makes double what the person who makes the least is. And at large US corporations, the average is 303 to 1. Does your boss work 303 times harder than you do? No. But that's how traditional large corporations work in the United States today. The co-ops, it's 2 to 1, much less. A couple workforce statistics, majority women working in co-ops and majority people of color working in co-ops. As of 2017, had significantly more reported female workers, likely due to co-ops existing more frequently in home care and childcare and cleaning cooperatives, which you know, it's traditionally feminized labor, and we're working to push back against that, but right now that's just how it is. In the year 2017, there was also a large increase in non-binary folks reporting, from 43 to over 100 different worker owners. Okay, so we're gonna get a little into the weeds here, but try to bear with me, and please interrupt me if you have any questions. So there's the ideal of democratic ownership, and there's the reality of how co-ops exist right now. In worker co-ops, worker owners always have the final say, no matter what, but this can look differently based on how the founders of the co-op decide to set up its governance and management structure. So this chart is just one example. So what happens is the membership, who are the worker owners in this case, they democratically elect a board of directors who then appoints management, which hires and supervises the worker owners. And there's this kind of flow of decision making, so that, like, say you're a worker owner and you are you're a baker. So like in your role as a baker, that's a full-time job in and of itself. You're also a worker owner. So you don't want to have to necessarily make every single decision for the business. So you say, you know what? I'm going to bake most of the time, and I'm going to use my voice as one worker, one vote to elect a board of directors who will make a lot of decisions for me, but they are beholden to me. The workers can get together and knock people off the board of directors. The workers can get together and decide that they don't want management to look a certain way. So this is one of the ways in which you can balance having a job as a worker owner and also being a business owner at the same time, because you have to wear several hats. And again, like I said, this is just one model of governance. There are some co-ops that choose to have all the workers get together and collectively decide everything. They make decisions at what are called general assemblies, and this is common in the reclaimed factories that Liana was talking about earlier. So one of the cool things about democratic workplaces is you can pick what the democracy looks like. And it will work differently based on the industry you're in, based on the strengths of each individual worker owners. Often the ownership roles of workers are rotated between them for shared responsibility and equity. I'm going to pause just for a second right here. Does anyone have any questions about that, or any of that stuff that I just brought up?
I have a, oh, go ahead. Oh, no, you first.
Okay, so in this model, are some of the membership, maybe can they be on the board or management? I mean, could they, be part of the whole circle, or are they distinct things?
Absolutely. Workers are often on the board and are often management as well. One of the co-ops that we work with has the director who basically functions as a manager is currently not a worker owner, but they are working towards becoming a worker owner. So to answer your question, worker owners can be in all of them. They also don't necessarily have to be in all of those roles. I think there was one other question.
Yeah, so that might have answered my question, but I was wondering, like, so if someone starts a co-op, so if you're like the founder of the co-op, where do you fit in all of this? Like, do you end up being a worker owner? Do you end up being a director or the manager? Like, if you want to be the manager, but the board of directors is supposed to hire you, like, how does that happen?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I guess I'm wondering. So if I started a co-op of my own,
yeah,
or wanted to, and say I wanted to be like in the management position,
mm-hmm.
How do I make sure I get into that role if like the board of directors is supposed to hire the manager, or like,
yeah,
or if they select it? I don't know.
That makes sense. Yeah. So in my experience, often what happens is when people are starting up a worker co-op, they usually, many or all of the original owners, like usually you start pretty small, like maybe you have like 4 or 5 owners to start, or even less, like 2 or 3. And a majority or all of them end up on the board, and then they vote to make a manager the manager, and like maybe one of them is also the manager. And it does depend, but I would say probably your best bet if you were starting is just like elect yourselves to the board, and then and then determine how your governance process is going to work, with the possibility that as you grow and get more owners, that process might be voted out because it doesn't work as well as it does now that you have more people. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
I think you answered that quite well. I think one common thread in both of those questions that I just kind of want to underscore is that in most cases, almost all cases in worker co-ops, you want everybody in that board of directors group and in that management group to be worker owners. The goal is everybody at the business is a worker owner so that everybody's equalized in the power that they have and the decision-making power that they can bring. You will see some co-ops that want to include other stakeholder groups in maybe like very high level decisions. So they might have like 1 or 2 board seats that are reserved for outside folks, like community representatives or someone who represents a neighborhood association or something. But most of the control you want to make sure is still this representative group of worker owners, because the whole point is that you're worker owned and governed, right? So most of the time these groups are all the same. And one other thing I wanted to highlight that you will see in some worker co-ops if you go and talk to worker owners at them is that while ownership is open to all workers, often there is a situation where as people come into the co-op, they have to work there for a certain amount of time, they have to engage in a certain amount of training before they become a full worker owner, and maybe they're just an employee in that sort of intermediate period. So you will have worker co-ops where there's 10 people that are worker owners and then maybe another 5 or 6 who are just employees. Maybe they're on track, or maybe some of them just didn't want the responsibility of also owning their workplace. And because ownership is voluntary, sometimes folks get to say, no, I'm good just clocking in and clocking out.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. I've Kunda raised their hand.
The idea of needing, oops. Okay, I don't know if you heard that, so I'll just start over. My question is basically around the idea of sweat equity versus cash dollars as you become an owner. If we're talking about being able to truly include people with the least means to start with, are there models already in existence for how to value work hours without cash investment towards becoming a worker owner?
Yes, so when you are incorporating as a cooperative business, and this I believe, and Andrew can check me on this, varies from state to state, but in New York State, there is precedent for when you are incorporating and valuing your co-op, you can say that you worked this much value of sweat equity as your capital contribution to the co-op, which makes you one of the owners of the co-op and entitled to dividends on a cyclical basis that's usually referred to as patronage. Patronage is basically just like the co-op word for like the share dividend you get at the end of the year for your ownership in the business. Andrew, do you have anything to add to that?
The specifics around like valuing sweat equity are going to vary based on like usually state laws and restrictions and how the IRS views it. But in general, just like you can value sweat equity when you're starting an individual business or a partnership, the same rule applies to co-ops. You can certainly get together with your founding group and say, okay, you've clearly put in like 100 hours worth of work toward this project, and that's valued at any sort of capital we all might need to be pitching in as the founders in order to be able to build this co-op. One thing I wanted to mention, just because it, I don't think we get into it later in the slides, is this notion of one of the key things that usually follows with worker ownership is everybody paying in to purchase essentially their worker owner share in the company. And if you think about like how traditional businesses are started, people buy a number of shares in the company to become owners based on how much money they have. But in co-ops, and in particular in worker co-ops, everybody's share is the same dollar amount. It's always, you can only buy one share because it's one worker, one vote, right? And in ways where you're really trying to build an equity and make sure that folks who don't have a lot of capital or generational wealth are able to participate in the co-ops, is you keep that member share price, that worker owner share price, really low. You know, you don't have to capitalize the full business by raising all the money from each of the worker owners. So maybe your buy-in share to become a member is only $200 or something like that. And you can offer folks a way to pay that out through their paychecks over time, right? Rather than having to come up with a lump sum. And then the co-op can go leverage that small capital that everybody pitched in to go get a loan for a startup or to expand your business or something like that.
Cool, thank you, Andrew. We have to keep rolling just so we can get through to the end here, but I really like that we're kind of thinking about the nitty gritty here as we move from the ideals of cooperative economics to how they can work today. So if you have any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll answer them as we're going here. So, all right, so let's take a moment to talk about how co-ops act in this current moment. First of all, workers collectively decide how to respond to the crisis, which safeguards their health and well-being. I'm thinking of a very large delivery service that has something called Prime membership, where people are getting sick because they can't decide whether or not they are working in fulfillment centers. If such a business were to be a co-op, workers would collectively decide for themselves what is the safest and healthiest for themselves, which would, leave them at less risk from businesses who only care about profits, or at least primarily care about profits. The next one, workers get to decide who to lay off and why, or to reduce everyone's pay to keep their coworkers employed. There was, a stimulus that went out a while ago that made, for at least a short time, unemployment seem interesting to a lot of people. And so in this moment, again, if workers could decide for themselves who it works best for to keep working, who it works best for to not work, it just works better for more people. And finally, like Liana brought up earlier, co-ops are historically more resilient during downturns. That's just how it is, especially at the small business level. Co-ops are less likely to shut down during economic crises, and this is a crisis moment. So I just wanted to bring up how in this moment specifically, thinking about co-ops as a potential answer to some of the problems that a lot of workers are facing right now. All right, so let's bring it back to you all. We've seen how co-ops currently exist under capitalism, but how do they start? We would love to do a shorter breakout here, but please introduce, we're gonna break out one more time. And when we do, you're gonna be with different folks, most likely than you were before. So please take a moment to reintroduce yourself and just start to talk about a couple of things you need to start a co-op. Like, what ideas do you need? What resources do you need? Just to start thinking on a high level, and we'll bring it back and we'll walk through that. So Andrew, if you could please start that, and we'll get talking. All right, so what did we come up with? What are some things that you all would need if you wanted to start a co-op?
We kind of agreed that you realistically just need a group of people willing to collaborate and then a building. Just two things.
You definitely couldn't do it without those things. Who else?
Well, one of the things we talked about was, you need like minds in the community, or people who are interested in what you are trying to do, and then people who can benefit from it. So whatever product or service you're trying to cooperatively run, there needs to be a need or desire for it. But also we talked about the initial funding for the co-op, and a question came up of, is it possible to get grants for a co-op, or is it just regular loans like other businesses, or like startup funding, or what have you?
It's a good question. It's something that I think we'll touch on in a few slides, but I will tease the fact that it's usually funded by loans, not grants, but the loans are special and better than other types of loans sometimes.
There used to be something called the Cooperative Bank. I don't know, but it might have gone under during like '06 or maybe even earlier than that, I think.
You may be referring, do you mean locally in Buffalo?
No, I mean globally, like
Oh.
internationally.
There is a national cooperative bank that still does exist and offers loans to various types of co-ops.
We were trying to cooperate. We were trying to turn our professional trade association into a co-op, and the bank basically couldn't guarantee the loan anymore, and it fell apart.
Yeah, that's rough. There are several different loan funds around the country that that provide specific loans specifically for cooperatives, and we work with one of them called Seed Commons. But yeah, we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Any other ideas of what you need to start a co-op? All right, well, I'll keep moving. We only have 10 minutes left, and thank you all for staying with us this long. So again, if you have anything you'd like to add to that discussion, feel free to post it in the chat. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Andrew, who will discuss how co-ops start.
This is a giant question that could be talked about for a very long time, but I'm just going to present a couple of sort of key things to get your minds thinking in this direction. But you know, in essence, this is a lot of what we at Cooperation Buffalo exist to support folks in doing. So, Michael, if you go to the next slide, yeah. Oh, we're missing one of them there, but this is a list of 5 really key things necessary if you're starting up a brand new co-op, right? And the first one is finding the group of people, which I heard mentioned in the report backs just a minute ago, is you're going to need to have a co-op. You need more than one person and an idea, right? Also, you're going to need what we call here a market fit, but this is essentially that piece of the puzzle where like you have to be able to exist in capitalism. So you have to know what you're selling, who your customers are, what speaks to them, who are you competing against in your particular industry or field. Determine values. Co-ops, because of their nature of being community owned or worker owned, have values at their core, those cooperative principles being an example of that. So making sure that those are infused in the business model that you're coming up with. Necessary resources, so capital, money, like was just brought up a minute ago, but you're going to need other kinds of resources, like you might need particular certifications, licenses, special equipment to do what you do. You might need a building. You might need to rent a space, you might need to own a certain kind of facility. And then lastly, building relationships. So other stakeholders, investors, customers, other folks in the co-op community that are really interested in that 6th principle, co-op supporting other co-ops, which has been a really great way in which a lot of the co-ops in Buffalo have been able to start through the help of the co-ops that already exist. So that's just a little snapshot of what it takes to start up. There's many different ways to do that, you know, especially in that area of thinking about how you build your group of people, especially people that are interested in the co-op idea. I've seen a lot of really wonderful examples in other parts of the country where folks start reading clubs, or they will read a book about co-op history in their particular community to kind of like gain a sense of those shared values and ideas together. And then when it comes to converting an existing business to a co-op, here's the basic structure that we use with a business like that. So it's already up and running. It already has most of its resources that it needs. It already has a good market fit and a product that it's selling, and hopefully it's profitable. When someone wants to convert their business to worker ownership, we first engage in this stage where we just figure out, okay, is this really a good idea? That's this exploration stage. Then we get to an assessment stage where we actually like get into it a little bit and really examine how the business is structured, what kinds of structural changes would need to happen, like in management or governance or things like that. And also to make sure that like the finances prove out and it's a business that if it's put in the hands of the workers, it's actually going to build wealth for the workers and not harm them. Then there's a piece where we actually structure the transition. This is where lawyers and lending capital gets involved to make sure that all of the like necessary pieces are in place. Then there's when all the documents get signed. That's the complete stage. And then this is in our model specifically, but I really think it's necessary always. Like, it's one thing to get a co-op to sign all the documents and become worker-owned, but it's another thing to make sure that in those first few years when it's just starting off as a worker-owned business instead of a single owner business, that it actually has support, ongoing training for folks that are becoming worker owners to fix like this move toward an ownership culture, toward a structure that is more democratic, to make sure that the business actually sustains long-term. So how can Cooperation Buffalo help? The primary function for us is to support and really dive deep with worker co-ops, whether they're startups or whether they're existing businesses that are converting to worker ownership, especially and importantly, those that align with our values of deep democracy, environmental sustainability, and a focus on Black and Brown and other marginalized groups. We offer technical assistance in all sorts of forms to both new and existing co-ops. Even if they don't always fit that whole values filter for us, sometimes we can do fee-for-service work to just step in and support a meeting that has to happen at a co-op or something like that. We also are a local member of a national financial cooperative called Seed Commons, which is one of the several cooperative loan funds that exist. Seed Commons does their lending in what we call a non-extractive way, where we don't look at credit score, we don't take collateral from folks, but what we do is we form a really trusting relationship between us and the co-op members, and we work with them until the loan is paid back. And we do community education programming like this webinar. So please feel free to reach out to us and let other folks who might be interested or have co-op ideas, have a business that might be a good one for a conversion, to talk to us. We have initial consultations at no cost with lots of folks, and we would be happy to help you make a co-op a reality or to connect you to the folks that can make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. So that's it for Co-op 101. We have a lot more programming coming up this year. Like we said earlier, this webinar is part of a series and there's one left. The last one is called Share the Weight, Transitioning Your Business to Worker Ownership. And this will be focused on conversions and specifically presenting converting your business to worker cooperative as an alternative to selling it because of the business downturn due to the COVID crisis. We've said this several times now, but co-ops have been shown to be more resilient than traditional businesses during downturns. So if you know anyone who's been considering selling their business or who may just be interested in the co-op model at all, please feel free to let them know. We'll be sending out an email to all of the participants today with this information and other information. We'll have information for how to register along with the slides and video from this webinar, and those will go out by the end of the week. So if you are serious, if this webinar has got you thinking, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to start a co-op because let's go. If you're serious about that, we are offering a free comprehensive 13-week course this fall to help you do it. We cover business and financial planning, democratic governance, as well as cooperatives' place in the movement for a solidarity economy and more. So these are pictures from last year when we took for granted that we could all be in the same room together. This fall is going to be virtual via Zoom, similar to this. And like I said, we'll have more information for that later. And that is all for us. Those are our emails. Please feel free to reach out to us at any time. It's 7:28. Does anyone have any last questions or thoughts before we close out for the night?
Hey, I just want to say that I really appreciate the outreach efforts that you guys are making. That was one of the things we talked about in the last breakout, was like building deeper relationships, and I think you guys are doing a really good job. So I just wanted to say that.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else? Well, I hope everyone has a really good night, and we'll hear from you soon, I hope. Take care, everybody.